So we've talked about with our recaps how to set up your characters, your plot, your world building, your magical elements, your villain. But what if you do all those right, but it's still boring? That's what we talked about in our video, why the Lord of the Rings works, while the Rings of Power doesn't. In this recap, I'm going to quickly go over what we talked about in that video in a shorter stance and what we can learn from this. So starting with the Lord of the Rings, we open with narration as you see these rings being made, and you're told there was 3 to the elves, 7 rings were given to the dwarf lords, and 9 to the race of men. You're hearing this all, and it's narrated by Galadriel. Okay, it makes you think about what's so special about these rings, and then you hear that they were all deceived, and that there's a mastering that this Dark Lord Sauron made. Versus in the Rings of Power, we open, technically this is not the exact opening, the opening scene of the Rings of Power is young Galadriel floating a little boat down a river, and then her brother talking about how great she is and something like that. But we're talking about the opening that's so similar to the Lord of the Rings that it's clearly a copycat. Right after that scene with Galadriel, you go into the opening. You begin with Galadriel, just like with the Lord of the Rings narrating, as she says, "The great foe Morgoth destroyed our very home. He destroyed the light of Valinor, took away the light of the trees of Valinor." And so we're already seeing this big difference. While with the Lord of the Rings, you have this idea of just, it's introducing something very simple about rings, and it's allowing you to piece everything together as it goes. Everyone understands rings, so it's very simple rings. Now we can continue on adding more stuff onto it. But with the Rings of Power, we have trees of Valinor, we have this, we have Morgoth, which really doesn't matter because later on, because the rest of the season, Morgoth doesn't really come up. So I don't know why they're mentioning the whole thing about Morgoth. Okay, so you're throwing all this stuff at me. Big question is, why should I care? With the Lord of the Rings, there's this feeling of, first there's this element of just whimsy, and you're like, what's going on here? Well, with the Rings of Power, there's not that. Second of all, with the rings, it's a very simple concept. Rings. Okay, so these rings were given to people. In one moment, you're like, why should I care? But before that, when you hear,
"The world is changed. I feel it in the water. I feel it in the earth. I smell it in the air."
there's already this element going into the scene when you're seeing the rings. You're like, okay, what's going on here? You're curious now. But with the Rings of Power, there's nothing to make you curious about this. Oh, the great foe Morgoth destroyed the light of the trees of Valinor. For any Tolkien fans in the comments, you're probably going to already know what the trees of Valinor is. As you can see, I have the Silmarillion. I understand that stuff. But the big thing is, why should we care? So then we go into 2 scenes that are almost identical, where Galadriel explains how Sauron is taking over lands. He's destroying people with the power of the ring. Then you hear Galadriel say, because of this, a band of men and elves band together to destroy the Dark Lord and take down how he was building up. And then in the Rings of Power, a band of elves band together to take down Morgoth for doing this. In one way, you're like, okay, very similar. Why would the one work and why would the other one not? Well, it comes down to the simple thing as I just explained. We already have this curiosity, and because of that, we're getting dragged into Lord of the Rings more. So when we hear all these people are dying, first of all, people dying is way more treacherous than this mean guy stole some of our lights off of our tree. That's not as bad of a reason. And because of that, we're not going into this battle saying, oh, I really want to see them, succeed with this. You're going into the battle being more like, okay, why should I care? And that's where we come into the next problem of, well, the battle is boring. Well, with the Lord of the Rings, you get to see the taking of the ring from Sauron. So there's more to that, where now you get to see the journey of the ring, which leads us into a really big thing. It's a golden rule. If you can cut it and it wouldn't take away from the story, it's too boring to keep in. But that's a big problem with the Rings of Power. For the Tolkien fans, you guys know what that is. We're going to mention this because you guys know what it is. And by the Lord of the Rings, the simpleness of this ring, if you know the story of the rings from the books, you're going to know more about this. It's still, people can only watch the movies and still understand the story. Where with the Rings of Power, this opening has Morgoth. Who is Morgoth? While the Lord of the Rings, yes, it doesn't go into detail about who Sauron is, but there's this feeling of this power. While with the Rings of Power, it says, oh, and there was a Dark Lord named Morgoth, and he sucked up these lights of these trees. And you're like, okay, from a Tolkien fan, I know what's going on here. But from someone else, it's like, okay, so why was that important? Because then they brush past that and immediately go on to, and Sauron started attacking them, and they had to fight Sauron. The big thing we can learn from this is the whole thing of make your things original, and if you can cut something and it sometimes benefits the story by cutting it, then why do you have it in there in the first place? If you guys haven't yet, please consider subscribing so you can see more videos like this. I'm going to be putting out a video, hopefully in the next couple of weeks, talking about how the Fellowship of the Ring perfectly set up in its first act, the Fellowship. If you guys enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. Comment down below your thoughts. This has been the Movie Night Reviewer, Peter Wary, signing off.